Hi, I'm Jeannine Bailey, and today I'll be presenting about E.F. Hutton and their path forward on ethics implementation. As a reminder, E.F. Hutton was a financial institution that became a cautionary tale for its industry peers when it was discovered in 1985 that they had engaged in check kiting to defraud other financial institutions out of millions of dollars. For those of you that don't know what check kiting is, it's the practice of writing checks against accounts while funding those accounts with checks from other banks. Essentially, E.F. Hutton was using the time period between when the checks were written and when the checks cleared to give itself a free loan. The company ended up pleading guilty to over 2,000 felony counts of mail and wire fraud. They had to pay $2 million in fines and over $8 million in restitution to the institutions that they defrauded, and also were investigated by the House Judiciary Committee, the Department of Justice, the SEC, the Labor Department, and a bunch of other institutions. Now, to move forward and recover from this scandal, the company needs to make a dramatic shift in the culture of the organization. For the sake of this discussion, we're going to assume that E.F. Hutton would be able to operate autonomously regardless of new owners or leadership of a larger organization. We're also going to assume that we are making the recommendations in the time period directly following the discovery of the scandal. Now, before embarking on the activities to change the culture and rebuild the relationships with stakeholders, E.F. Hutton is going to need to deal with those that participated in the check kiting activities and those that were aware of the activities but chose to remain silent. After a very thorough and independent investigation, the company is going to need to terminate all of those that participated in the unethical activities. The company also needs to comply fully with the investigations underway by the federal and state agencies into this scandal. By doing that, the actions would send a strong message to the whole organization internally and to other stakeholders externally about the stance of the company going forward. It could be a stakeholder signal that the company is demonstrating a different attitude about ethical compliance. And once those new people are in place to replace the people that left, the company can begin the next phase of the implementation process. So we'll obviously have to follow a 5-step process that we discussed in our curriculum. The 5 steps for an ethics implementation would be defining the ethics culture there, communicating about it, practicing, evaluating, and reinforcing it. So let's dive in a little deeper on that. First and foremost, they need to define what ethics means to the institution. They have to create a code of conduct or a value statement that clearly and strategically lays out the organization's stance on how to operate. This will need to be bolstered by different policies and procedures that will support how to do the day-to-day functions of the company and dictate at a more granular kind of tactical level how employees should conduct certain activities and the consequences for failing to do so. The leadership of the organization needs to be really heavily involved in the creation of these documents, and also needs to be very involved in disseminating them to the workforce. Also need to be very involved in the stakeholder analysis done prior to any writing or rolling them out to the workforce. Without heavy leader endorsement in both words and actions, the workforce is not going to be likely to adopt them. The next step for the leaders is to communicate. It would be insufficient just to create the code and supporting policies and then just like slap them up on a website or something. So they need to make sure that they find a multi-channel approach to communicate these out to the workforce. In addition to making the code of ethics available for reference on a company website or public bulletin board, the company also needs to reinforce the code and policies through training that they do with the workforce, covering the code and policies in meetings repeatedly as a topic, referencing the code and policies and speeches by leadership to the workforce at all hands meetings and those kind. They also would benefit from making their code of ethics publicly available to their shareholders and other external stakeholders. As long as they weren't giving up anything that would impact their competitive advantage, I think this would be a good signal to help repair the relationship with all those external stakeholders to make those documents available for review. And as we mentioned before, the leadership of the organization needs to model the behavior. So it can't just be something that's in words. They have to show in actions as well that they stand behind this new code of ethics. So now it's time to put this whole code into practice. We've rolled out the program, we've communicated it to the workforce. So now the first real tests of the program are going to be when there are actions taken that conflict with the code by a member of the workforce and how the company responds. By putting mechanisms in place like anonymous tip lines or an official concerns program, employees will have a channel where they can report violations to be investigated. Now, if the company chooses not to have its own program, employees are going to have no choice but to go to an external agency like the Department of Labor or the Department of Justice. And now E.F. Hutton will know if the program is working when the members of the workforce start exerting peer pressure on each other to do, quote unquote, the next right thing. And hopefully they will begin to kind of police each other and be a positive influence on each other to act ethically. And that's when they'll know that the company's culture has really officially begun to shift into one of ethical compliance. So after a period of time, the company is going to need to evaluate how well the program is working and if adjustments need to be made or corrective actions need to be taken. So they could do things like audits, so look at the program over a specific evaluation period, or they could use scorecards that track metrics of activities in real time. I would actually recommend doing both. And first and foremost, it'll tell them how healthy the program is. Second of all, it shows that the company is serious about the effectiveness of the program. They're going to get valuable data about the culture, and some, if not most of the employees, would likely be hesitant to go directly to leadership to offer feedback. So this provides a way to get feedback about the program to upper management, and it will help them check and adjust if they need to. The final component of an implementation plan will revolve around reinforcement. This is where the rubber will really meet the road for getting the culture to shift towards one of ethical behavior. One surefire way to make sure all levels of the organization pay personal attention to the implementation of the program will be to include it in each employee's performance plan. By tying their performance reviews to how they conduct themselves instead of just what they can accomplish, it reinforces that ethical behavior is a company-wide expectation. Another way to reinforce how the work is done will be to publicly recognize individuals and groups that engage in ethical behavior in a way that aligns with the code of ethics or policies. So an example of this might be an employee that rewrote a contract with a partner bank to comply with the new code of ethics. And then maybe it cost the company a little bit more money, but it was the right way to do things. So they highlight this person as somebody who is really exemplifying the new code of ethics. By shining a light on the right kinds of behaviors, the rest of the workforce will have a more concrete idea of how they should be conducting themselves. Above all, E.F. Hutton will be best served by responding well to issues as they arise. If leadership wants the code of ethics to take hold within the organization and to truly change the culture, their response to issues must be consistent with the code and provide corrective actions to ensure more violations don't occur in the future. The organization needs to respond quickly to faint signals of deviation from the code of ethics and nip any failures in the bud. The results of investigations or the corrective actions taken need to be communicated to the workforce for them to learn from the issues without having to make the mistakes themselves. It's going to be a lot of work for the organization to take on, and because a good percentage of the organization will have left due to their participation in the check-kiting scheme, E.F. Hutton really needs to be deliberate about devoting the time and resources for all of this to work to happen. The only way to rebuild their relationship with all stakeholders, from employees to shareholders and beyond, will be to go all in on the plan that we've laid out. If the organization can do that, they'll continue to learn from their mistakes and build on their successes, which will position them to have their financial and ethical success for a long time to come.